Boeing, the biggest symbol of American aviation, is literally begging China for 500 airplanes just to survive, while Germany, the economic engine of Europe, is in total collapse. What is happening right now will completely redefine the global balance of power. Folks, what I'm about to reveal is one of the most devastating crises in modern industrial history. While everyone was distracted by other headlines, two of the West's largest economic powers began crumbling at the same time. And when I say crumbling, it's no exaggeration. We're talking about the end of an era. Something extraordinary and terrifying is happening at this very moment. Boeing, which for decades was the pride of American engineering and a symbol of the United States' dominance in aviation, now finds itself on the brink of complete collapse. If you want to understand how this crisis will affect the entire global economy, hit like now, share your first impressions in the comments, and subscribe to the channel, because the details will leave you in shock. Imagine the humiliation. The largest airplane manufacturer in the United States is literally on its knees, begging Beijing to place an order for 500 aircraft just to stay alive. $500 billion in contracts, tens of thousands of jobs, and all the prestige of American aviation depend on a decision by China. If Beijing refuses, and there are signs it may do exactly that, American leadership in aviation could disappear overnight. Airbus, from France, is ready to take the top spot worldwide, and China has its own manufacturer, COMAC, which is already producing competitive commercial jets. But Boeing is not the only storm on the horizon. Across the Atlantic, Germany, long the economic engine of Europe, is losing steam catastrophically. Factories are shutting down. Exports are plunging under 15% tariffs imposed by Trump. Energy prices have skyrocketed since Berlin turned away from cheap Russian gas. Authorities are trying to plug the hole with billions of euros in emergency spending, but Germany's industrial base is cracking like an iceberg. The slogan, "Made in Germany," which for decades was synonymous with world-class quality, risks becoming an empty shell. Industrial plants are closing, jobs are disappearing, and millions of Germans are watching their standard of living collapse. Let's break down this crisis, starting with Boeing. A company long considered the pinnacle of American engineering is now living through the darkest period in its history. What was once a source of national pride is falling apart, shaking the entire global aviation sector. In 2024, Boeing was already drowning in debt, taking out loans of tens of billions just to keep operating. But instead of stabilizing, the situation kept getting drastically worse, pushing the aerospace giant into absolute desperation. Problems had been piling up for years, like a deadly snowball. The 737 MAX disasters in 2017 completely destroyed global trust in the brand. Entire fleets were grounded worldwide. The reputation was permanently stained with blood. Then COVID-19 hit like a hammer, crushing global demand for air travel. But the most devastating blow is happening now. China, the fastest-growing aviation market in the world, has turned its back on Boeing completely. Beijing embraced Europe's Airbus, which has already delivered hundreds of aircraft to Chinese carriers. And this is not just the loss of a customer. China is literally the future of global aviation. Forecasts indicate that over the next 20 years, China will account for nearly 1/5 of global demand for new airplanes. Without this gigantic market, Boeing loses the biggest commercial opportunity of the century. That's why the company is in a humiliating position, begging Beijing for an order of 500 planes. We're talking about $500 billion in contracts, tens of thousands of American jobs, and all the prestige of United States aviation at stake. This dispute has gone far beyond normal business. The American government has tied Boeing's fate directly to trade negotiations with China. Trump is trying to sell the deal as part of a broader package, essentially resorting to blackmail. Buy our planes or prepare for new tariffs. But China has options the Americans didn't expect. Europe's Airbus already dominates the Chinese market, and China's state-owned Comac is emerging as a serious rival. Its C919 model is already flying domestically, with nearly 50 deliveries in 2024. International certification is on the way, and Comac is preparing to expand in Asia, Africa, and beyond. Massive state support gives China every reason to drastically reduce its dependence on America's Boeing. If you're following this historic transformation in global aviation, hit like, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel for more explosive analysis. For Americans, this is an absolute nightmare. The historic Boeing-Airbus duopoly that dominated aviation for decades is coming apart. Airbus is profiting massively from its American rival's weakness, while Comac pushes Boeing completely out of the Chinese market. China's logic is simple and devastating. Why trust an unreliable and politically unstable partner when stronger, more dependable alternatives exist? Even Trump couldn't hide his frustration. He publicly attacked Boeing over the constant delays with the new Air Force One, a project meant to symbolize American engineering that turned into yet another international embarrassment. If Boeing cannot deliver on time, even for the American president's own plane, why would China trust it with an order for 500 aircraft worth $500 billion? The stakes are gigantic. Each lost contract means billions in foregone revenue, tens of thousands of jobs at risk, and a growing conviction that American industry is losing control completely. Losing China threatens not only Boeing's future, but the entire image of the United States as an industrial superpower. It's a humiliation that echoes far beyond aviation. Boeing's collapse is not just the fall of a company, it is the sign of a far deeper and more frightening transformation. When industrial giants begin to fall, Washington does not stand by. It intervenes massively. From there, the entire American capitalist system starts shifting in a troubling direction. What once belonged to private shareholders becomes a direct tool of state policy. Think about what that means in practice. Companies like Palantir, already closely tied to intelligence and military contracts, could turn entirely into instruments of state surveillance. Defense titans like Lockheed Martin and Northrop Grumman, symbols of American military power, could gradually cease being profit-driven corporations and become structures serving government priorities first. At first glance, this might seem beneficial. Companies get stable funding and long-term government guarantees. But the reality is far more concerning. The United States would be adopting exactly the same methods it spent decades fiercely criticizing in China, state-directed capitalism led by a central government. And this process is already underway quietly but rapidly. Recently, Washington bought a 10% stake in Intel, one of the most important tech giants in the world. It was not a temporary loan or short-term relief. It was a step that made the American government a shareholder with real power to influence core corporate strategy and decisions. For decades, American leaders condemned Beijing for steering its largest industries through massive state ownership. Today, Washington is quietly doing exactly the same thing, and Intel is only the beginning of this transformation. If the United States is willing to hold shares in a semiconductor giant, what would stop it from doing the same with Boeing, Palantir, or companies at the core of artificial intelligence? Now let's leave Washington and go to Europe, because what's happening in Germany today could completely redraw the entire continent. For decades, Germany was the absolute industrial heart of Europe, the country that set global standards in engineering and exports. Today, that legendary reputation is crumbling at an accelerated pace. In the second quarter of 2025, the German economy shrank by 0.3%, worse than all expectations. This officially pushes the country into recession. German exports are falling sharply. Investment in machinery and equipment fell by almost 2%. Construction plunged by roughly the same amount. This is not a normal market fluctuation. It's the direct result of American tariffs choking demand for German products, weak global markets, and an energy crisis that never ended after the cut-off of cheap Russian gas. The crisis hits not only industry, but entire families. German consumer confidence has been falling for 3 consecutive months. In August, Germans again drastically reduced spending, worried about job security and rising prices. When households close their wallets out of fear, domestic demand disappears, making any recovery even harder. It's a devastating, vicious cycle. Berlin's response was desperate. The government temporarily suspended its rigid debt brake, one of Germany's most sacred fiscal rules, and launched an emergency fund of 500 billion euros. Goldman Sachs forecasts growth of only 0.4% in 2025, more a weak pulse than a real recovery. German debt is rising rapidly. The Bundesbank expects the deficit to surpass 4% by 2027. For a country long seen as Europe's financial anchor, this marks an absolutely dramatic historical shift. If you're stunned by this simultaneous crisis of Western giants, hit like, tell us what you think in the comments, and subscribe to the channel with notifications on. Even with massive injections of public money, the effect is barely felt in the real economy. Energy remains the most painful weak point. Germany is betting on expensive American LNG to replace the cheap Russian supply it lost. The European Union promised to buy $750 billion worth of fuel from the United States, but experts seriously doubt these promises will be fulfilled in practice. German factories need gigantic volumes of cheap, stable energy, and right now that simply does not exist. An LNG terminal in Wilhelmshaven will open soon, but it's far too little for an economy of this size. The country is being squeezed from all sides. American tariffs crush exports. Expensive energy makes production uncompetitive. Emergency spending pushes the nation into more debt. Ordinary citizens lose faith in the future. There is also South Korea, an ally completely caught in Washington's vice. Trump forced Seoul to pour $350 billion into American projects while keeping punitive tariffs in place. Korean conglomerates are building factories in America, buying expensive American weapons, and issuing dollar-denominated bonds to prop up Washington's financial system. Meanwhile, China is moving quickly in technology and shipping, leaving Korea trapped in an economic cage it cannot escape. Put it all together, Germany's deepening recession, Boeing begging for Chinese orders, and Washington quietly copying China's model of state capitalism. It's clear these are not isolated events. They are pieces of the same terrifying mosaic. The picture shows an America that can no longer lead without brute pressure, allies cornered in crises, and a China ready to exploit every fissure. The stakes could not be higher. If this trajectory continues, the global balance of power will not change gradually. It will lurch sharply and violently. At that moment, countries caught between the hammer and the anvil, like South Korea, will be forced to choose definitively between Washington's suffocating demands and Beijing's unstoppable rise. To keep up with these rapid changes that are already completely reshaping our world, hit like, comment your predictions, and subscribe to the channel, because this transformation is only just beginning. What we are witnessing is not just an economic crisis, it is the end of an era of absolute Western dominance and the traumatic birth of a new world order. Boeing begging for contracts, Germany entering recession, America adopting state capitalism. All of these are symptoms of a tectonic shift in the plates of global power. And China, watching patiently, is ready to inherit a world the West can no longer lead effectively. The question is no longer whether this change will happen, it's how fast and how brutal it will be for those who end up on the losing side of history.